In the previous chapter, we explored Logic's default templates, finding that what they provided was a collection of sounds to provide some inspiration at the beginning of a new working day or a new working project. But what if none of those templates offer you what you want? Maybe your musical needs are different, or you just want either a much more simplistic template, which just gives you a couple of sounds to work from, or a much, much bigger one. And in particular, music for media composers are used to working with templates which provide every single orchestral instrument that they might want to work with, set up, ready to go at the beginning of every day, so that when they start a new project, they haven't got to configure every string section and every different horn articulation that they might want to work with. They're all sitting there waiting for them. So regardless of the musical style you favor, working from a template that you have curated yourself can obviously get your creative process up and running much more quickly. And in this chapter, we're going to learn how to build one. So what I'm going to do is to start from an empty project, and I'm just going to hit choose. None of these details down here matter for now because I can change them all within the Logic project. So I'm going to select choose, and immediately Logic's going to ask me what I want to start building, just like as if I was going to start working on a new project completely from scratch. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to choose a software instrument, and I'm not worrying too much for now what the instrument is going to be that's going to go onto that software instrument. Instead, what I'm going to do is just to create this so that I've got one software instrument waiting to go. And at this point, I need to ask myself, okay, well, what would I want my template to have? What sort of a musician am I? And what would be useful to me at the beginning of every working day? So let's suppose, for example, I'm a singer-songwriter. It could well be that what I want to do is to have a piano sound at the very top of my project. So the first thing I'm going to do is to relabel this track piano. Now, I haven't added an instrument to it yet, so when I play notes, obviously nothing's going to happen. I don't have a piano right now. But also, if I'm a singer-songwriter, am I going to be working at 120 beats per minute? Well, maybe not. So I might decide that I'm going to make the default template of my, or tempo of my project 100 BPM instead. Now, what's really worth knowing about templates is that every last detail you put into a template will be remembered by Logic. If you want the loop browser to be open every time you come to a new Logic project, if you open the loop browser and you save your template like this, that sidebar will be open when you open up your template. Every last detail of the screen, the position of the playhead, you name it, it will be there. Secondary commands, like you can see that at the moment I've got the marquee tool selected here. If I change that and make it the scissors, Logic will remember that that's the tool that I want to have available to me. So what that means is that I can make a whole series of choices about a whole range of things. For instance, I might decide that the way that I want to use the transport bar is to have a much greater collection of information available to me. What I've done here is to come down here and select the custom option, and now the transport bar is bigger. It's showing me the tempo, the key signature. It's showing me that the resolution for when I come to do chopping or working with regions, audio regions or MIDI regions once they're in the project is going to be over 16. I can see the MIDI in and out lights working as well, and I've even got sort of control over seeing how hard the CPU is having to work. And now that that is there, that's going to be saved as part of my project as well. So of course, if I do want to work from a piano, what I might want to do is to open up the library and go and find a sound that I want to work with. So I'm going to come into the pianos, I'm going to select the Yamaha Grand Piano, and what that's going to do is to load not only that sound, but a collection of effects for it as well. So now I've got my first sound within my my project. So that's fine. I might decide that actually when I work and I write for piano, what I also want to do is to maybe have a bass sound. So what I might want to do then is to create another software instrument. I'm just going to press create, and again I'm going to just sort of come into the various options here, come into the bass options, and I might decide that I want to work with a fretless bass. Now again, what that's going to do is to provide a name for me for this track, and I can see all of the details that again are involved from the perspective of the effects that have been added alongside that core sound. Now, to give you some idea of what I mean about the details of a project, I can see that by default, what Logic has done for any bass instrument is to provide me with a little icon of this bass. Now, some people like the icons in Logic and some people can't stand them. I could swap this. I can click on the icon button here, and I might decide that actually what I want to do is to have an icon that looks like this instead. And what Logic will do is to remember that I've made that choice, and every time I open up my project, my fretless bass will have that icon instead. Now, it might seem like a tiny little detail, who cares really, except that if this is how I'm going to start my day every day, actually these little details matter. Like, for example, do I want to keep the inspector open on the left-hand side? Do I want to have access to the library? If I'm working on a laptop and I keep all of this open and I've got the loop browser open, I'm losing a lot of the main page in terms of space. So I might decide that what I want to do is to close that down and to close the loop browser down so that straight away I've got a much more considered workspace available to me. The other thing to say about templates is that whatever sound you've currently left selected will be selected next time you open this project. So actually right now, if I saved my template with just these two instruments in it, every time I open it, I'm going to find that the fretless bass is currently selected, which means actually if I want to write for piano before I write for bass, it'll be worth my while coming back and selecting the piano. As I say, every single detail is selected. So I can keep going. I could decide that actually alongside playing the piano, it's nice to have maybe a bit of a little bit of a groove to work to. So I could open up the loop browser, I could come in, find some beats, and I might decide that the genre that I want to work in is, I don't know, I might decide that I want to work as a sort of funk writer, and maybe what I want to do is to come and find just a sort of sparse little beat. And if I find this quite vibey, just as a thing to work to, then what I could do would be to drag it across and put it on a track. And then what I could do would be to put this right up at the top. But if the moment I discover that I'm working with this groove, it's too loud or the piano feels like it's drowned out by it, then of course what I could also do would be to bring its volume right down so it's just very gently playing in the background when I first start writing. And equally what I could do would be to say, well, I don't want to start every day by listening to this same groove, so I want to include it within my project so it's there to work to, but I'm going to start my project with this groove muted. Similarly, what do I want the sort of zoom to be on this project? Do I want this to be nice and big and open so that I'm sort of greeted with a Logic project which looks like I'm just sort of focusing on the first 4 bars? Again, all of the zoom commands that I use will also be saved. Literally everything I put into this project will be perfectly captured to be saved as my template. So once I've configured software instruments, audio tracks, effects that I want, the tempo of my project, the way that the whole project looks, I'm in a position to then save it so that I can use it every time I come back to Logic. How do I save a project as a template? Well, if I come to the File menu and I drop down to the save options, underneath save and save as, I can see that I've got the opportunity to save a project as a template. And if I select that, this is going to now be added to any other project templates I've got within my project. So if this I decided was going to be my kind of singer-songwriter start point, I might decide to call it that. Let's get rid of any typos. So I've got my singer-songwriter project here, and I'm just going to save that into the template options. And now that's been saved. Now what that means is that when I now come back to the various templates that I might want to work with, Logic is now asking me if I want to save this as a song as well as a template, and I don't need to do that, so I'm not going to save that. But what it means is that if I now come and I decide that I want to open a new project from the template options, if I come down to my templates, what I'm going to discover is that my singer-songwriter start point is here. And if I click on it, I can see straight away that its tempo is 100 BPM because that's what I selected. And if I come and select choose, what's going to happen is it's now going to load that project. There's the beat that I put in and it's muted. Here's my piano track ready to go. And here are the other things that I had selected. My bass is here waiting for me as well. But you can see that track selection is crucial because the last thing I did was to save it having selected the funk beat. That's the track that's currently selected. If I wanted to just immediately play the piano, I needed to remember to click that track so that it's ready for me to play the moment I start my new project. So saving templates is great because it means that what you've got at the beginning of every day is a chance to work with a collection of sounds that you've curated. A lot of people think that working from a template means that you're going to write the same piece of music every day. It's just like, well, if I've always got the same sounds available, surely I'm going to write the same track. Well, if every day you reach for a piano, because that's where you start writing, wouldn't it be better to have that available to you? You can swap any of these sounds out. So actually working from a template doesn't have to in any way hold your creativity back. In fact, another way of looking at it is this. If you imagine that every sound that you had available to you was organized by instrument type and was looking at you every day, starting on its own track, then effectively you'd have the opposite of being limited in terms of your creativity. You'd have every sound in your system available to you, organized onto a track, ready just for you to select and play. So the deeper you make your project, the more instruments you put into it, the more you organize it, the more you make it yours, actually it becomes a kickstart for creativity rather than an impediment to it. But to give you an example of a template that I use all of the time, this is my full orchestral template, which I've created. And what I'm going to do is to open this up. So straight away you can see that my default tempo is at 110 beats per minute, and I'm going to open this. And what is going to happen here is that I've now got access to an enormous number of sounds waiting for me within this project. Now, yeah, it's true that it takes a little longer to load, and you can see that that's happening now. But what I've got here, and it looks like an incredibly simple template with just a few tracks, but what you can see is that for my full orchestral template, I've got all of the sounds that I might want to work with waiting for me in track stacks, in combinations ready to work. So for example, if I want to work with keyboard instruments, I can open up the track stack and I can come through and I can see that I've got a bunch of different pianos available to me to start writing with. Similarly, if I come into, for example, the long strings, I've got an enormous number of instruments waiting for me from third-party libraries, for violin 1, violin 2, violas, cellos, double basses, but not just from one library, but from multiple libraries, so that if I decide suddenly that I want to write for a smaller chamber-sized section, those sounds are waiting for me rather than a full symphonic section. And so it goes on. If I come down to the synths towards the bottom, if I'm working with synthesizers, you can see that I've got a couple of different track stacks for those. I've got one for synth pads, which contains a group of sounds, and I've got one for synth pulses, which allows me to go into things that are just going to sort of tick over and be more rhythmic. So this is a much, much bigger template. And in fact, if I open all of these tracks up, I can see that within this template, I've actually got 282 tracks waiting for me to come in and start working. Now that doesn't mean that I always write for 282 tracks every time I write a piece of music. It could be that I just do a string arrangement. But because these sounds are waiting for me, rather than having to find those sounds, load them, set up reverbs for them, EQ them, I can make all of those choices available so that the sounds are inspiring to work with and they're kind of pre-mixed. They're all going to be sort of organized into track stacks in a way that I want them to be, so that when it comes time to deliver those tracks, I'm in a position to either deliver a stereo mix or to break my project down into different stems to run off all of those instrument groups one at a time. So you can see that templates can be as simple or as deep and complicated as you want them to be, but what they're always going to do is to save you time. Imagine if every single time I open Logic, I had to set up every single one of these instruments. And even though it takes 30 seconds or so for this project to load at the beginning of the day, it's a lot quicker than me having to set up all those instruments every time I want to write a new piece of music.